Thanks all for joining us, for taking a faithful stand. We've got a great lineup tonight, and we are grateful that you have joined us on what is a pretty nice summer evening, but there is a lot of work to do and a lot to learn. And so glad you are here. And so as we get started, I'm going to pass it over to Sister Teresa, who's going to open us with our opening reflection.
Good evening, everyone. How's that for volume? Okay. Thanks, Brianna. Thanks, everyone, and good evening. As we prepare for our meeting this evening, let us begin with the core practice of prayer. Through prayer, we connect in deep relationship with each other, the divine, and our world. And so let us pray. We as a faith-based group acknowledge the immigration system has been broken for years. Political parties have aided, amended, ignored, and raged against immigration policies. The current administration, congressional leaders, judiciary system make little effort to confront the ill will and actions of the executive orders regarding the immigrant. The tide of scapegoating our fears has risen and fallen upon the immigrant community. The loudest blowhorns of hateful power portray the immigrant as other, but most of all as a threat. This portrayal of the immigrant is not new. It's been used for thousands of years. Project 2025 uses the scapegoating and the targeting of immigrants to create division within our lives, our neighborhoods, our community, and our state. Creator God, we ask forgiveness for supporting a broken immigration system and for the times we have treated God's children as others. We, as faithful people, acknowledge our failed vigilance to care for the immigrant, our failure to call out fate, and we, your people, stand at a turning point. Most gracious one, we hear your call to lean into the turmoil, to lean into the unrest of our times with the strength of faith. We heed your call to reach deeply for the willingness to act, to raise our voices in love. Creator, you spoke to the disciples on Pentecost, to the people of Moses during times of turmoil and unrest. Provide us, as you provided the disciples and the Israelites, with tools of guidance and discernment. Teach us steadfastness for the path of justice and cultivate within each the readiness to stand against all injustice. We, your people of faith, recognize the turning point this past weekend with the federalization of troops, not with the intention of assisting local law enforcement to disperse protesters, but to unlawfully prosecute anyone who stood in the way of this administration's immigration directives. We, as faith-filled people, stand in the way. We stand in the way with tools of guidance and discernment. And tonight, we hope to fill our boxes, our tool boxes for our work with the activism of the Beatitudes, the active nonviolence of Gandhi, Martin, Jesus, Malcolm, Dorothy, Cesar, Mary, Dan, Juan. We fill our toolboxes with the love of the beloved community. Creator, we ask your blessing on our speakers tonight and on our work, and we are grateful this moment to stand strong. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Teresa. Ahmed, would you like to introduce our guests?
Yes, thank you, Brianna. It's my pleasure to introduce as our speaker tonight, Mr. Daryl Maureen, the National President and Chairman of the Board for Forward Latino. I first got to know Daryl as when he was a co-founder of the 80% Coalition for Gun Violence Prevention more than 10 years ago. And during that time, I've experienced him as a serious, committed person who engages across many communities to advance the causes for which he cares so deeply about. The Forward Latino nonprofit organization, which he serves as president and chairman of the board of, has a mission to inspire and engage communities, strengthen democracy, improve lives of working families, protect the environment, and stand up for equality and civil rights. They cultivate, train, and support a diverse national network of future Latino community leaders addressing the civic, economic, and political challenges of the 21st century. He is also a member of the Latino Jewish Alliance and a charter member of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee's Justice for Immigrants Committee. He is also involved in the boards of Latino Academy Workforce Development, the Milwaukee Jewish Museum, Employ Milwaukee, and Wisconsin Anti-Violence Effort and Education Fund. Among his many awards are being named Hispanic Man of the Year by UMOS, named a Friend of Education by the state of Wisconsin, and named to the United Way of Greater Milwaukee's Philanthropic Five. It is my pleasure to introduce Daryl to speak to us about immigration, fact, fiction, and faith.
Thank you, Ahmed, so much for that introduction. And let me just start by saying how honored I am to be able to speak before all of you this evening. And let me applaud all of your efforts. We're living in a very, I used to say interesting time, but I think it's now safe to say we're living in very dangerous times with the things that we are seeing happening, not just across our great state of Wisconsin, but in fact, across the country. So once again, just very honored to be speaking with you here tonight. Let me start off by telling you just a little bit more about myself beyond what Ahmed said there. My wife and I own a company that does barcoding and Wi-Fi networking, etc. I never thought in 1,000 years that I'd be doing any of the kind of work that I'm doing today. And I can only believe it's because of the stepping stones the Lord's put before me that has brought me to where I am. So I'll share a little bit about that journey with you as we go through the presentation. So is it all right if I go ahead and share my screen? Okay, great. So let me just start off with this opening picture. This is taken down at the border between South Texas and Mexico. There's been so much talk about the wall. And while for many years we'd studied the issue of immigration and have advocated on it, we kept hearing certain elected officials make statements about an open border, et cetera, and people being allowed to flow through. So we actually went, and we've gone several times now, to tour the border. And I can tell you unequivocally, the border has never been left open for folks to come in. It's sad that people choose to use this issue as one of division instead of just solving the problem. So anyways, we'll touch a little bit about this as we go through the presentation. My journey began, I'm a parishioner at St. Mary's in Hales Corners. And boy, this is 2005. My wife and I My wife and I had a conversation one night and we said, the Lord's given us a little bit more than what we need. Perhaps we should look to start giving back. And that Sunday we went to church. As we were leaving, we saw a little 8.5 by 11 lime green piece of paper with a picture of this mother who our kids would always play with in the crying room at the church. And we never knew their name, but they were very nice people. And it said at the top, help us save Regina. And as we're walking out, we're like, well, that's the mother. We should look into that. Maybe we can help. But our cynical self said, but before we get too involved, let's look into it to make sure she's not just somebody looking to game the system, right? And the more and more we looked into it, the more and more we learned the tragic story both her and her husband had suffered through. They'd both fled and had been tortured in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And anybody who knows anything about that region know it's not democratic, and it's been ruled by warlords for a generation. She'd been sexually assaulted by groups of government or of warlord soldiers and had been targeted for death. And that's when she decided just to flee. She eventually made it to America, where she worked and saved up money to hire an attorney to file for asylum. And it was a real estate attorney who took her money. And anybody who works in this area knows that you only have one shot to introduce evidence that you're worthy, and you're trying to prove that you have credible fear and you're worthy of asylum. And most of these documents can be anywhere from 40 to hundreds of pages long. Hers was 4 pages. She had been ripped out at 10:30 at night from the shower naked by individuals who'd kicked down her door wearing immigration flak vests, goggles, helmets, holding semi-automatic firearms. Her husband, who had been tortured as well, David, fell to the corner of the room and started yelling and screaming. He still has PTSD from all of the torture he suffered. And their children, Coco and Lydia, 4 and 5, were just there screaming, not understanding what happened. This is one of the things, so I'm sure many of you may remember this. This was a story on the Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN. It was a nationwide effort. It was led by a sister there at St. Mary's, Sister Joseph Marie Flynn. And so my wife and I decided to join the effort. And we had people calling in from all over the country, faxing the Board of Immigration Appeals, sending the request for her case to be looked at again. Sadly, this had just happened. This was post 9/11 when the U.S. was looking to ship everybody out of the country. When the family would go down to meet Regina, where at that time they were doing detention in Kenosha, I'll never forget one time they came out and little Christopher just kept saying, break the glass, break the glass. And the members of the media didn't know what he was saying. Well, he was saying break the glass because he wasn't allowed to touch his mother. He could only talk to her through the glass. And when we talk about the need to defend human dignity, right? So many people stop to think about what that true meaning is of human dignity in the family and the sacred bond between mother and child. Despite all of these efforts and tens of thousands of calls and faxes and emails going into the system, Regina was transferred to O'Hare, where we knew we just had a few days left before she would be sent back to the Congo. And by this time, even the English government had confirmed for us that she'd have about, at most, 48 hours to survive. When you return to the Congo in this manner, you're not long for the world. I had a friend who was part of another civil rights organization in DC. The group flew me out there to DC, never having done any of this stuff before. And I remember my first meeting was to be with Senator Cole and some other senators and staff members. I was supposed to have 45 minutes. And I'll never forget walking into the Hart Senate office building. It was on the 4th floor. There were a bunch of TV crews right there waiting to see me come, et cetera, but they didn't know what I looked like because they were the DC crews. And I saw what it said on the door, and it said, the Committee on the U.S. Constitution. I can't tell you the feeling I felt or the weight I felt on my shoulders. If we weren't successful, these kids weren't going to have their mother, and David wasn't going to have his wife. I just kept walking by the door as if I was just another passerby, and went to the restroom, threw water in my face, and prayed. Turned, went back, walked into the room. I was there for about 4 hours. The senators were coming and going. The staff members were coming. They were bringing other staff members with. We were taking them page by page through all the documentation we had to prove that this thing was for real. Later that day, I had a meeting with somebody that I never should have been able to have a meeting with. And towards the end of the day, I went back to my hotel room in tears, worried that we hadn't done enough to save this woman's life. And I was so grateful, though, that I had this one meeting. So I called Sister Joseph and I said, Sister, you're never going to believe it. I had the meeting with that person. And it was the oddest thing. She said, around what time was that? Not congratulations or unbelievable. She said, about what time was that? And I told her. And she said, you know, Daryl, around that time, I felt the need to drop to my knees and pray that you'd be able to talk to them. And while I've always been a person strong in my faith, people wouldn't necessarily say that, wouldn't necessarily say Daryl's an overly religious person that does these types of things. Or would say these types of things. Well, I figured, okay, Sister Joseph, she's a nun, right? That's what she does. Okay, sister, I'm going to get off the phone and call my wife and Angela and tell her. So I called my wife and I told her I had the meeting. And once again, she didn't say congratulations. She asked me what time I had the meeting. And I told her, she said, you're never going to believe this. Around that time, I felt the need to drop to my knees and pray. If you want to talk about a faith-affirming event in one's life, that was one of them right there. And about 45 minutes later, we received a call, and Regina received the first day of deportation issued post 9/11. And I was reflecting on that because this Easter I ran into her at Mass, and there she was with her husband. And she was telling me how proud she was. Christopher's about to graduate from MATC, and Lydia from George Washington University in DC. And I thought, sometimes it just takes us here on earth trying to push open that door just a little crack so that miracle can come through. So when people say, why are you doing these types of things? Or they say, what can I do? I can't make a difference. We all can make a difference. And that's why I've been doing this work ever since then. So besides seeing my children born and marrying my wife, it's the most amazing feeling in the world. So just to give you a little background, I'm sorry I didn't mean to take so much time with that, but just wanted to give you some context. And thank you for what you're doing. Tonight, we're going to be talking obviously about fiction, facts, and faith. Being that so much of the immigration issue right now is focused around the Hispanic community, as they do represent the largest number of immigrants coming to the United States, I wanted just to share a little context or background with you on that. Let me start off by asking this question. What do you all think? And feel free to put this in the chat, and Reverend Brianna, if you could monitor that for me. Tell me what you think is the most visited pilgrimage site in the world. If you could do that for me real quick. I see Mecca there, Mecca. Any others? Sikh temple in India? Lords? I'm going to go ahead and share my display again. Okay, Jay Neely, you got it right. Yes. It is the Basilica to Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. Averages between 20 and 30 million visitors a year. And I bring this up because so much in today's headlines, we read about individuals from south of our border who aren't from our great country, are all criminals, drug dealers, murderers, people released from the insane asylum. But they're people of strong faith. And the Basilica draws people from not just Mexico, but Central America and South America. And for those of you who may not know the story, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the image of a Virgin of Guadalupe, but she represents the first Marian apparition here in the Americas recognized by the Catholic Church. There was Juan Diego, a peasant, was walking in the hills and had a vision of the Virgin, and she asked him to have a shrine built to her there. He quickly ran to the local bishop who demanded proof of this encounter, and he went back and she instructed him to go to the hilltop and pick some flowers. And it was the middle of winter where there was no flowers should be growing. And he had a cape, which is called a tilma. And she told him to gather them up in the tilma and to take them to the bishop. When he takes him to the bishop, he opens up the cape, lets all the flowers fall out. The bishop's astonished that there's flowers, but then happens to know that that particular type of flower, the Castilian rose, isn't native to Mexico. But even more to their astonishment, when they look at his tilma, his cloak, they see that image of the Blessed Mother. So that is still on display at the Basilica. There are replicas that you'll see in the Vatican. I saw one at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and there's actually one here up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, at a pilgrimage site there, where we're going to actually be taking a pilgrimage of some local individuals up there in the coming weeks. But anyways, that's a little bit about the history and the strong faith that you find in people south of the border. We're all children of God, right? And God knows no borders. I'm a strong believer in that when the Lord grants the gift of life, he grants that life human dignity that is no humans to diminish or to remove. This is a picture of a young girl we saw sleeping. I took this picture down at what I call a refugee camp outside of Reynosa, Mexico, just over the border across from McAllen. It was surrounded by 14-foot walls of cinder block. The cinder block had been donated. The immigrants had built those walls to keep the cartels out because so many of them were being victimized by the cartels. Many of them had been waiting there up to 2 years for their chance to apply for asylum. Incredibly hot, and the stone on the base of the camp, you'll see it. It wasn't a white stone, it was a dark brown stone that absorbed the heat. So even just walking in there, you felt like you were in an oven. And here this poor girl has been there for all this time. The toughest part was walking around and you see these people looking at you like, is this the person who can move me up in line? Is this the person who can get me an interview for asylum? And knowing that there was nothing I could do, it was heartbreaking. Here on the left, you'll see, the immigration patterns, how many immigrants are in the country, where they're coming from. The overwhelming number are from Mexico and Central America, and leading all the way down to South America. I'll share with you so many times, and we'll get into this in a little bit. People say, why don't people from down south just come here legally? Number one, there are so many barriers, and only a small fraction of the entire population are eligible to come here. And that's if you have, a parent, if you want to bring a parent here, or a son or daughter, or direct relation, et cetera. Otherwise, for the most part, unless you get a temporary work visa, there is no way to come here. And even if you are one of those fortunate few, last time I checked, it took about 18 years. For the current backlog right now, would have 18 years before they even look at your application. So for many people, that's simply not an option for them. Once again, we hear so many things. They're criminals, they're prisoners, they're lunatics. They're illegals bringing fentanyl to the US. They don't pay their taxes. They don't, and they take all of our benefits. They're taking our jobs. And, why don't they get in line, as I mentioned before, and come here legally? And I'll give you a copy. Ahmed and David and Reverend, I'll send you a copy of this so you can share it. All of the facts I list here, I've listed the sources from them, so you'll have that, because it's important that as people of faith that not only do we preach the Lord's word, but we educate those on the facts and on the truth about immigrants, and dispel with all the hateful rumors that we're saying. So first one was a study done by the U.S. Department of Justice. U.S.-born citizens are 10 times more likely than immigrants to be incarcerated for weapons-related offensive, 5 times more likely for violent offenses, and twice as likely for property crimes, and nearly twice as much for drug offenses. Right, so the immigrant population is dramatically less likely to be committing any crime here, and as such, the overwhelming majority are only here seeking a better life and a way to provide for their family in a place that is safe. Stanford Institute of Economic Research. Opponents of immigration often argue that immigrants drive up crime rates, but actually their studies are finding the more immigration rates go up, the more crime goes down. And it's been the case for about the last 140 years. And once again, it goes on and on with study after study. So you'll have access to all of these documents. With regards to fentanyl in immigrants, we often hear that as a primary reason why the current administration is taking the steps it's taken. Per the Department of Homeland Security report on December 22nd, they found that 90% of all fentanyl brought into the United States is driven into the United States by United States citizens. I repeat that. 90% of all the fentanyl that comes into the United States is being driven in on automobiles and trucks by United States citizens. Now, there was about 5 months ago, 5 to 6 months ago, an immigration bill that was presented that included funding to put new drug detection machines at all of the ports of entry. Right now, the only way they find it is by literally randomly pulling over vehicles and taking them apart. Had that bill passed, overnight, it would have dramatically reduced the flow of fentanyl into our country. Sadly, that bill was never allowed to come to a vote. But once again, for all those folks out there saying that they're being brought into here by undocumented, no, 90% once again are being driven in by U.S. citizens, and everybody in Congress knows this. Cato Institute, U.S. citizens were 89% of convicted fentanyl traffickers in 2022, so they were 1 point off from what DHS is saying. And Cato Institute is not considered a liberal bastion by any stretch of the imagination. When it comes to taxes and who pays taxes and who doesn't, the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy found that undocumented immigrants pay $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. That's what they did in 2022. Most of that amount, $59.4 billion, was paid to the federal government, the rest to the states and local governments. More than a third of the tax dollars paid by the immigrants were in payroll taxes dedicated to funding programs that they're not eligible for, like Social Security, Medicare, and so on. Undocumented immigrants paid in 2022 $25.7 billion in Social Security taxes, $6.4 billion in Medicare taxes, and $1.8 billion in unemployment insurance tax in 2022. There's over $250 billion that they paid into the Social Security fund to date, which once again, they'll never see a dime of. Income tax payments by undocumented immigrants are affected by laws that require them to pay more than otherwise. Well, let me just rephrase that. Per act of Congress, immigrants on average have to pay a higher tax rate, income tax rate, than United States citizens. And that's by an act of Congress. So when they say they're not paying taxes, not only are they making sure they're paying taxes, but they're on average paying them more or making them pay at a higher rate. Up to 75% of undocumented immigrants, once again, another study, Pay Full Taxes. Committee on the Responsible Federal Budget, undocumented immigrants contributed over 15 billion per year to SSA without intention of collection. The Stephen Goss right there, the chief actuary, he actually estimates that between 74 and up to 74 to 75% of undocumented pay full taxes. So here's the thing that really gets me though. These are a couple of training slides. They're dated, but they're still, the information on them is still accurate. By act of Congress, the IRS had to set up a system by which undocumented immigrants had to pay taxes. We talked about that, right? And on average pay a higher tax rate than US citizens. So it was created in 1996. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about it. It's the ITIN system, the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. It was designed primarily for use by unauthorized immigrants as well. And they also said, well, if we're doing this, let's let others lawfully present use it as a way to pay taxes in country, et cetera. And these are the IRS training slides, just so you know, okay? The one on the right, bullet point number 3, this does not confer immigration status or work authorization, right? So by act of Congress, if you're undocumented in the United States, just by that sole act alone, it's not a crime. Once again, and that's by act of Congress. However, if you don't pay your taxes, it is a crime. So what does that tell you about what Congress has been doing, right? The way they're gaming the system to take the benefits, reap the benefits, but not to allow them to participate in the fruits of our system. So once again, it's called the ITIN system. So many times I hear people say, you're lying, that's not the truth. And I give them that IRS toll-free number at the top of the page. It's hard for them to refute that when you tell them, go ahead, here's the number, call the IRS. Tell them you have a friend who's undocumented and ask them how they're supposed to pay taxes, and they will literally walk you through the process. So whenever you hear somebody say they don't pay taxes, just tell them to call the IRS and ask the question, right? Now, there is a percentage that use bought, borrowed, or stolen or fake social security numbers. We're gonna deny that, but it's a small percentage relative to those who are actually participating in the system. And most of those were never made aware of the ITIN system. You also hear, well, you know, our folks have fought and died for the country and they're just coming here to take the benefits. Well, not too many people know this too. This is an updated screenshot of the Selective Service Program. If you're male, if you're between the ages of 18 to 25, you have to go and sign up for the Selective Service System and swear to defend the United States of America if called upon to do so. And most people say, well, why do they do it? Why do they register, right? And why do they pay their taxes if they think they can get away with it? Most of the immigration reform legislation that's been presented in the last 2 decades has had the requirement in there that folks who would be allowed to adjust their status must be paying their taxes, and if eligible, must have registered with the Selective Service. Okay, so once again, these are things the men and women in Congress know, but are electing not to highlight, and it's important for us to go ahead and let people know how much they are fully participating in our system by acts of Congress without being able to benefit in any of the upside of that. When it comes to workforce, recent, this is March 18th, Bureau of Labor Statistics. We have 0.9 unemployed people for every job opening for the 4th consecutive month. Meaning for every 10 jobs that are available right now in the United States, we only have 9. So officially, the US does have a labor shortage right now, and it's only predicted to get worse as more and more folks age out of the workforce. And once again, here's the link to that study. Here is another graph that demonstrates what states have the greatest workforce shortages. We're not at the worst, but we're pretty low. So for every 10 jobs that there are in the state of Wisconsin that are open, we only have 6 employees. So if we took literally every person who was unemployed and we put them into a job and magically they were trained to do it and they were motivated and it was something they wanted to do, we would still be over 68,000 people short. And this is right now with all the immigrants that we currently having working in the system. So up into the tariffs, I can share with you, I mentioned to you, I'm a business owner. Up until this tariff nonsense that's been happening, workforce was the #1 concern of almost every business leader out there. But now it's fallen to #2 because of all the uncertainty that's been brought about with the tariffs. Once again, you'll all have access to this. Yeah, American Immigration Council new data analysis, right? Where are immigrants working? Over 20% of the workers in U.S. agriculture are immigrants. I've seen estimates actually as high as 42%. 25% of U.S. construction workers, 23.1% of all STEM workers, 15.6% of U.S. nurses, 27.7% of health aides are immigrants. And I will share with you too that Wisconsin is a state where DACA recipients aren't allowed to get a professional certification. So right now, nursing schools such as Carroll, et cetera, when they graduate nursing students and their DACA recipients, they're moving to Illinois or Indiana. Yes, even Indiana, to go and work because they can't be a nurse here in the state of Wisconsin. When it comes to dairy, boy, immigrant laborers, that last line, contributes to 79% of the U.S. milk supply. Right. Why don't unauthorized migrants come here legally? Many of our ancestors that are here, didn't have to come through and jump through all these legal hoops. I'll also share with you, it's become very, very expensive, even just to apply to come here, in the thousands of dollars. And if you're that person fleeing extreme poverty, fleeing danger, extreme crime, et cetera, it's very difficult economically to come here. Although I think this administration has proposed a gold card for people willing to pay, I think it's $5 million to be able to move to the front of the line. Today's unauthorized immigrants would prefer to live and work lawfully in the United States if they could. Under current laws, there's no line, as I mentioned before, for lawful immigration to the United States. People think there is, there simply isn't. So when people say, why don't they come here illegally? I typically just ask them, well, how? And most of them are surprised to learn there is no way for the overwhelming majority for them to do so. With all this elevated rhetoric that we've been hearing and misinformation spread, they're coming here, taking our jobs, taking our resources, not contributing, et cetera. We're seeing people act on those words as if it was fact. When we started Forward Latino, I was shocked to see how much time we were going to be spending providing emergency assistance to hate crime victims. The very first one was right here. You'll see me holding up a picture in court. That's Jesus Manzo Perez. This is in 2015. And I'll just share this. We saw a dramatic increase in hate crimes in 2015. This was right there on the border. He's in Milwaukee, but right on the border with West Allis. A gentleman lived in a 4-unit, 2-story flat or 2-story apartment building. On the second floor, his son, who goes to a Catholic school, said he was having trouble getting the coin laundry machine in the basement to work. So the father went down with him, and they were speaking Spanish because they were natively from Puerto Rico, so they're U.S. citizens. And a gentleman stepped out in the hallway and said, "Why don't you ever speak English?" And Jesus just kind of shrugged it off, and they went downstairs and they got the laundry machine working. Came back upstairs. The minute they stepped onto the entrance of the apartment complex or the apartment building on the first floor, Jesus saw a rifle barrel about 4 inches from his head before the gentleman pulled the trigger. He then tried to shoot his son, who jumped out of a window and got away. Shortly thereafter, we would learn that the shooter then went up to the second floor to the second unit there, moved all the children to one room and locked the door and executed the Hmong mother and father. Um, that was difficult. I'll share with you that I was made aware that I was at my son's Pinewood Derby race at St. Mary's when I got a call from MPD, and they asked for my help because they said there was a family who was hiding in this hotel and wouldn't talk to them or anybody because they just suffered this tragedy. They asked me to call them. I said, I don't know them. And they're like, well, can you at least try? Here's the mobile phone number. They're not answering anybody's calls. Can you at least try? I did. And on the first ring, they answered the phone and they invited me over. Once again, all I can think of was there was divine intervention there because there's no reason why they should have taken my call. That's, following that, we developed our protocols on how we need to provide assistance to hate crime victims. Number one thing is to provide security for them and their family, because it's a very traumatic and terrifying situation. The overwhelming number of hate crime victims we assist don't let us report it to the police or anybody because they're afraid if word gets out, someone's going to come and finish the job. So Jesus' family let us help them with the DA's office, et cetera, to see that this man was put in prison for the remainder of his life. Just underneath that, and this was about 3 years ago, I'm sure many of you remember Mayud Vilas. Been a US citizen for 14 years, was going out to dinner by himself, was told to leave the country and asked why he was invading the country before the gentleman threw acid in his face. Thankfully, he had the presence of mind to run into the restaurant, take off his clothes, and keep pouring water on his face. By the time the police got there, it had eaten its way through his jacket, through his sweater, or his sweatshirt, and his shirt. To see him today, by the miracle of God, he doesn't have any intense visible scarring. But the very fact that somebody would do that, right? So we worked with the DA to make sure hate crime charges were brought here. In the upper right-hand side right here, Nicole Marie Poole Franklin. This was somebody, we helped the victim just outside of Des Moines. She was in her SUV at a stoplight. She sees a 14-year-old Natalia Miranda walking to school on the sidewalk through the front yards. She depresses the accelerator, jumps the curb, and continues to chase Natalia. Natalia saw her coming because she heard the engine, starts to weave back and forth through the front yards trying to get away. She kept turning until she successfully ran her over. And when the police asked her why, she said, well, she's an illegal. I had to try to kill her. We took our legal team to Des Moines to demand the U.S. attorney file hate crime charges because it met every qualification, and she admitted it. And the attorney general refused to let the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Iowa bring hate crime charges. There was a change of administration within a week of the USU attorney being appointed and taken charge. The hate crime charge was filed, and that same day she admitted it and pled guilty. You'll see Natalia there. That's the bottom right-hand picture of her in the hotel room. By the grace of God, once again, she's fine today, just struggling from obviously the mental trauma. And then we also know what happened at the Walmart in El Paso. The list goes on and on and on. It's very concerning the way people are taking the extreme statements today and acting on them. So from a position of faith, we really see this as the need to defend human dignity, as I mentioned before. The Lord endows each life with that human dignity. I'll share one more story with you. As I came back, feeling the high from Regina, from Washington D.C., I land and I get a call from my mother, hysterical, and I feared that my father had had a heart attack. And I talked her down so she could speak. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? What do you need? She said, you have to do something. You have to do something. I said, what do I have to do? She said, you have to help little Charlie. It had been in the news. Little Charlie had just been moved from a hospital in Chicago up to Children's here. Since the age of 2, he'd been battling acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Now, we all know our bone marrow makes our blood, right? It creates these blast cells. They turn into red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, that kind of thing. Well, when you have acute lymphoblastic leukemia, they're malformed and they get so big they can't make their way out of the bone. So it's extremely painful because it always feels like your bones are going to explode. And the father was undocumented, and he needed a bone marrow transplant. There wasn't a match, and they were afraid that if they went public, people were going to find out the dad was undocumented, and that they'd be targeted. We said we'd assist. We started the bone marrow drives. That's when the death threats against me and my family started, and still continue till this day over everything else. But it was, they had full insurance. He was a very accredited welder, made good money, good insurance, but still people were they're taking from our system, they're taking from our system. Uh, a match was found in California, but he got it too late. And I'll never forget, I'm there in the room, and they were a Spanish dominant family. So I'll say this in English. But the doctors had told the parents that they could keep little Charlie alive for probably another 8 to 10 months, but he'd be hooked up to machines the whole time. And the doctor asked him what he wanted to do, and they said, "Well, we need to talk to little Charlie." So I'll never forget being in the room, and you see all these machines going, and you're hearing all the beeping and everything. And they tell him, and 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 he said, "Mom and Dad, it just hurts so much now. I think I'm ready to go play with the little angels." Here's this 5.5-year-old boy who's been fighting for his life the majority of his life. And he had the character, he had the faith, he had the human dignity to say that to his parents, knowing he'd no longer be here on earth within a week. And then I open my phone and I see the emails of hate. That's why we're all called upon to live our faith and to act on the injustice and to defend human dignity. Almost all major faiths, if not all major faiths, agree on what needs to be done in principle to fix our broken immigration system. Almost all major faiths acknowledge the right for a sovereign nation to be able to have protected borders. It's always been our position at Ford Latino that any kind of credible and workable immigration reform needs to provide the needs of our nation's security, our economy, and our faith in humanity. There was a bill that was introduced back in 2012 that would have done that, that balanced them all. It's not one or the other. It's not stick, it's not all carrot. It's a balanced approach. It's something I worked on with everyone from Nancy Pelosi and President Clinton to Speaker Ryan and late great Senator John McCain. Everybody knew we could do this. It didn't have to be all one way or the other. But sadly, politics had prevented that from happening. We need to restart and streamline the refugee resettlement program. I know many of you are involved with organizations that had to suspend your refugee resettlement programs. The USCCB has shut it down entirely. I know the Lutheran Church knows everything is on hold. I don't know if they're continuing with theirs or not, but everyone across the board is having issues. Sadly, the only individuals being allowed to come in right now under refugee status are the Afrikaners. white individuals from South Africa. They're the only ones who are being allowed right now to come into the country with refugee status. Enforcement efforts must be humane, just like any kind of border security measures. Long-term residents, as well as people who were brought here as children, should be provided an earned pathway to citizenship that is reasonable, and that root causes of forced immigration must be addressed. So different faiths say this a little bit differently, et cetera, but these are the commonality or the common themes that you find throughout all faiths, and we're in strict agreement with all of these. So, we've talked a lot about the injustices and the misinformation that's out there today, and the hate that is permeating so many, sadly. So I'm here tonight asking you, it's easy to let confrontational people drag you into confrontation. We encourage everyone to educate others whenever there's a reasonable opportunity to do so. Once again, we'll get you a copy of this presentation that they'll disseminate with all of the links. We're also putting together one-pagers that we'll be sending out as well in the coming week or two. We ask you to speak up. Whenever you see injustice, silence is acceptance, and we will all be judged one day. So we must make sure that we're able to give the moral and faith-based answers that we pledged ourselves to live by while here on earth. We're asking all individuals to contact your local county, state, and federal officials. Trust me, there's an immigration-related issue at every level. I can't get too far into it, but we're working with state, county, and local leadership with regards to issues in the courthouses and other sensitive sites. The sensitive site designation had been removed on January 21st by this current administration, the day after being sworn into office. Immigration officials were told they're allowed to go into hospitals, schools, houses of worship, and courthouses now. Places that used to be considered sensitive sites and were deemed off limits by previous administrations that were both led by Republicans and Democrats. We are also asking you, if you come in contact with immigrant communities, please point them to resources. We have what we call a toolkit where that's provided for families at risk of separation, that walks them through all the to-dos, what their constitutional rights are, as well as it includes power of attorney forms for both property and finance, as well as the second one for delegation or parental power. The last time the current administration was in office, we had MPS teachers and others throughout the state taking students home when the parents weren't able to come and pick them up after school. So we want to make sure everybody makes the necessary preparations so that doesn't happen again, and that there's individuals able to make lawful decisions when it comes to healthcare of minors, all those types of things. If people are looking for immigration attorneys, we have a list of about 28 that we've worked with, that we know are ethical, that are reasonably priced, that are competent, and most importantly, that are ethical. There is a fair number of immigration attorneys out there that will tell somebody something will be very tough, and because of that, it requires a $50,000 upfront payment when those are just individuals looking to take the funds. So, if anybody has any questions whatsoever, we're really easy to get a hold of. 833-LATINO-1, LATINO, not a zero, O, and the number 1. Or you can email us at update@forwardlatino.org. But we're here, we're a free resource. None of us, we're all volunteers. Even though we've run some of the largest programs in the state of Wisconsin and Iowa and in other states, we're all volunteer-based unless we get a grant and then we hire staff. But so we have no financial incentive. We just are here to do the right thing every time and to assist those in need. So I know I've thrown a lot at you tonight. I know my throat's starting to get a little hoarse or a little raspy, but let me go ahead and open up the floor to any questions. Because once again, given the short period of time, I know, and I probably still went over, forgive me. I just wanted to make sure I hit some core concepts of the different parts of the presentation with you. So, but any questions or comments?
Thank you, Daryl. We've got one question from Ahmed, and if anyone
Okay.
else has them, please drop them in the chat.
Yeah.
He says, obviously, there are many people who engage in hateful acts against immigrants who consider themselves people of faith. In your experience, what do you think is the disconnect between faith values and those who commit violence against strangers?
Yeah.
An easy question.
Yeah. No, well, so many people think they can wrap themselves in righteousness by using a couple of verses that they find in their religious text, but still have that hate in their heart. And I think, the Lord made us the way he did, and he did give us free choice. And I think to a certain degree, there is human nature in wanting to point and blame somebody else for any of our, our own personal failings. But it's then when we must make sure we fall back on our faith to remind us that we are all here to uplift one another and that we need to live by the word. But sadly, yes, there are those who cloak themselves in religious text, but don't live it. So our biggest theme here is, we need everyone to live their faith. If everybody truly lives their faith, there's no issue. And you can never justify hate, against hate. We need to lean in our faith to defeat that. So.
We have another question here
Sure.
that talking about how hard it is to talk with people who don't agree with us and without getting angry, and trying to probably have some of these conversations can be really difficult. Any advice on how to have hard conversations?
Yeah. I'll share with you, we've taken the approach that there's some folks that are just so extreme that it probably doesn't warrant you spending your time, right? Trying to win them over, because it simply won't be possible. But I will share with you, there is a fair number, the majority of individuals out there who are sympathetic or want to be sympathetic, but have been fed the wrong information. There is a recent Marquette Law School poll that a friend of mine, Charles Franklin, put out about a month and a half ago that found that overwhelmingly the voters of the United States do want to see people who've been convicted of heinous crimes, of violent acts, be deported from the country. However, if they were individuals who'd been here for an extended period of time and had not committed any crime, you saw an overwhelming majority wanted them to be allowed to stay in the United States. So I don't think we're going to be able to convert everyone. There are some folks that are just so entrenched in their positions, but there are also those who may not be on board but want to be brought on board. And it's those individuals who we need to identify and attempt to educate in a non-threatening, a non-attacking way. And I'll share this with you. There's not a whole lot of folks who don't interact with individuals who are undocumented, right? Oh yeah, but that's a good illegal. Who I go to church with. Oh, that's a good illegal who I have work in the store or I talk to, et cetera, right? It's bringing those folks around to say, wait a minute, they're humans. They're immigrants fleeing a horrible situation, and we need to fall back on our faith. And it's important before we take these extreme positions that we understand what's really happening, and then to provide those resources to them. Once again, a great way to do it. Please do me a favor, call the IRS or go on the Selective Service website, just so you understand how broken the system is. Are they here? Yes. Are they without documentation? Yes. Are they here participating in a system that Congress set up for them? Yes. So now it's time for us to have an honest discussion, an honest dialogue on what these people are doing here and how we benefit from them being here. So.
Thank you, Daryl, so much for all that you've shared this evening. There was one more question in the chat about religious workers, and I dropped some information in there just as we're running out of time. So go ahead and check that link out. It's from the United Methodist Church that can kind of talk through some of what religious workers are facing. Sorry, I've got some noisy kids in the background here.
No issues, but all the major faiths are having issues bringing people of their faith into the country to serve, people of faith in our country. So it's something that is impacting everyone, all major faiths. So we all need to come together and work productively in a productive manner to address it. I know we're all familiar with what's happening out in California. We know there's some bad actors who've infiltrated the movement out there and are doing things that aren't productive, such as burning cars, etc. We mustn't let our eye be taken off what is important here in the defense of our immigrant community, our immigrant brothers and sisters, but once again, make sure and encourage all to do so lawfully and peacefully.
Thank you. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Reverend Dr. Christopher Ross, who's going to close us tonight. So I will throw it to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Let us pray. O Spirit of understanding through diversity, Holy One of different languages and peoples and lands, we thank you for your presence with us tonight, and we pray that we also understand each other, and that the love we may find in you may be a love that leads to not uniformity, but true unity, a peace with justice. We seek your empowerment to remain in solidarity with each other and those who suffer. Move us beyond mere meetings and talk, beyond the comfort of reminders and rehashing, to the point of putting love into action and actually showing up for your people when they are threatened, showing up when they are scared, showing up whenever tyranny raises its fist. Your compassion and justice are for all people and for all creation. Be with us and guide us to show this same kind of compassion, that we may take part in your work in your world, showing up every day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are going to be taking a couple of months off for the summer, I believe. Is that right, David, Ahmed, Matt? Yep. Okay.
That is right.
And so we will kind of reconnect with you all in the fall as we pick up programming again, and invite you to go forth in action, go engage, go show up. Thank you all.
Good night.